It's good to have you here this morning. It's good to be here in the sanctuary, bright and early. My name is Pastor Chris, and I'm actually from SoCal. I'm a friend of Pastor Shifra's. We went to school together at Andrews. And yesterday I told my mom, "Hey, Mom, I'm preaching at the sanctuary at the Garden Grove Church." And she said, "Oh, that's the big church. That's the church where they have weddings at, right?" She's been here before. It's like pretty inside. I couldn't tell if she was saying it'd be a pretty place to have a wedding or a pretty place for me to have a wedding. I'm not sure which one she meant. Yeah, probably both. I'm really happy to be here with you this morning, and as it's getting really hot, as we're hitting this heat wave, as you're planning your summers, I want to ask you a question this morning. Why do you go camping? Why do you go camping? To get away? Come on, this is small enough, you can talk to me. Why do you go camping?
Get away from the city. Fresh air.
Get away from the city. Garden Grove is kind of a city.
Excuse for a bonfire.
Just have a bonfire, relax with your friends. Why do you think about it? Why do you go camping? Why do people, human beings, go camping? What's the point? Be out in nature, get away, where it's quiet. Yeah, you don't have to. You're not on the clock. You know, no one's like, "Oh, you're late. You didn't return your email." You're like, "I was camping." You live in this big, stable house. Everything's very predictable. And then you go camping and you don't really know what you're going to eat. It's like, I don't know, I'm just going to throw some stuff together. You don't know what time it is. And when you go to sleep at night, because actually I was camping in the Badlands in South Dakota. And when you're camping in the Badlands, you're just in this tent. You're going to sleep at night. And there's just buffalo. It's you and buffalo. You know, you don't have to pay for it like you do here in Southern Cal. No one is there to charge you. And you're sleeping in the middle of this grassland, you know, like Little House on the Prairie style, and the wind's blowing because there's no mountains, there's nothing blocking it, and the wind's just... And I realized why I like camping then. I realized I like camping because I just like how the wind shakes the walls of the tent. I just like how the wind shakes the walls, and I just feel small. That's why I like it. That's why I like camping. Today's message is called The Tent. Let's pray. Father, good morning and happy Sabbath to you. God, I'm here in the sanctuary, and I want to ask for your Spirit to anoint my lips, and I want to ask your Spirit to anoint our ears that we could hear your voice and hear your words this morning. Amen. In 1955, there was a young, ambitious pastor from the Midwest, because back then California was the mission field, believe that or not. You know, it was the mission field. There were people driving cars around, eating hamburgers and going to drive-thrus, and this pastor from the Midwest just wanted to come here and just plant a church. So, his name is Pastor Rob. He comes over here in 1955, and he has this list. He drives down Route 66. He has this list of 10 places he wants to plant a church. He crosses all 9 of them off because they're all taken or they're too expensive. All he has is $500 in his pocket from the Reformed Church in Illinois that sent him over, and he's like, well, the last place on my list is the drive-through theater on College Boulevard in Orange. And so he goes there, and he's just preaching. And he's preaching on top of this tar roof snack bar. He's just preaching to people 9:30 Sunday morning. The theater's supposed to be closed, but they rent it out to him, and he's preaching to these cars. It's a little ridiculous of a sight. People are making fun of him, pastors are. Sometimes the Santa Ana wind blows and his mic squeals because it's cheap, and his wife Arvella is playing the organ that's hooked up to the trailer, and sometimes the wind, it disconnects and she's like, whoa, and, you just feel so small. The Israelites, they kind of understand what it means to be small. They are small because it's so hot, you just kind of like shrivel down to a raisin, you know? Like, you have too much fat and you just trap heat, like me. You know, I'm from Asia, it's cold, we have more body fat, that's why we're good at running marathons. But if you're in the Middle East, your body's like skinny. It's hot. They know what it's like to be small, and they know what it's like to just wander around in a tent, because they wear the tents on their back and they go places with their tent on their back. Usually at night, because at night you don't have like hills and mountains to like confuse you, you just have stars, and they're looking for pasture for their sheep. The sheep following them around, and they're looking for pasture, and then they look for water because they're not in the same places. That's the life of a nomadic herdsman. And I bet one of those nomads walking around late at night with their goat following them, smelly goat and smelly you, and it's late at night and you don't know where you're going to find the next day's meal, and you're looking up at the stars and the wind's blowing in your face, and you just feel so small. And when they go to church, they go to church and it's a tent too, because God says, let them build a sanctuary for me, and they're living in tents. Well, I guess I'm living in a tent too. When you live in a tent, the wind blows and the thing shakes, and just imagine a priest in that time sprinkling some blood on the altar and dirt on the floor, and you're thinking of, if you were a priest in Babylon or Assyria, you'd be in a nice, big, fancy temple, and here you are in the wilderness with the wind blowing, and it's dirty, and you're dirty, and the wind's blowing in your face, and you just feel so small. I'm sort of a nomad myself. I'm still single. I don't really have like a set career. I'm just kind of bouncing from like youth pastoring job to youth pastoring job and renting a different apartment. I moved like 3 times in a year in New York, and I just kind of, it got too much for me, and I just gave my notice and packed up a car, and I drove here, just visiting friends, just took a month off. When you're a nomad, you can do that. But one of these days, I'll meet a nice girl, and I'll meet her parents, and maybe I'll have the wedding at this nice church, and, I'll buy a house, maybe get like a real conference job, get settled. Yeah, I'll probably do that. Because you can't live in a tent forever, right? You can't live in a tent forever. You have to grow. You have to build. And Pastor Rob, his church started doing well. And in 1961, he had to move because it was getting big. The Washington Post was writing about it, and the New York Times was writing about it, and these famous preachers were coming to visit him and just check out this church in a drive-through theater. It's actually pretty cool. And then he built the Tower of Hope. Started broadcasting out Billy Graham in 1970. He was like, hey, Rob, you should start the Hour of Power. You should make this a big thing. 2 million viewers a week. It gets too big. They have to build another building on that campus. It's a campus now. It's like a university status. There's 10,000 members a week, and 1980, he goes to the famous architect, Philip Johnson. He's like, hey, can you build us a church? I want it to be made of glass so it can be kind of like the drive-through theater. I want to see the sun when I preach. The architect's like, yeah, I can make that happen. 10,000 panes of glass. It seats a lot. 2,800. Maybe you heard of it, the Crystal Cathedral? Yeah, you can't live in a tent forever. You got to build. You got to grow. And the Israelites too, they weren't nomadic herdsmen forever. You know, God said you're going to be in the wilderness for 40 years, but eventually they built houses too. Nice houses, big houses. They started farming, they started growing, developing, their GDP got bigger. And they decided to build their God a house as nice as theirs. David saved up gold his whole life. His son Solomon built this majestic temple, twice as big as the old tent. Cedar wood inlaid with gold. I mean, if you melted down all that gold, it would be a block that would fill this whole stage, 16 feet square. It's 1/30 of all the gold that exists in the world today. That's how much gold was in that temple. It was worth maybe $5 billion. I'm sorry, I said million. $5 billion. If you could buy it in today's money, you couldn't even buy it. But you know, there's something about living in a nice, big, comfortable house. You just get too comfortable. Maybe you just get too big. Maybe that's what happened to Pastor Robert Schuller's church. They say it might have been like family struggles because all of his kids were all in it and he was getting older and he tried to pass it down to his son and they had some conflict. Maybe it was the family issues. Maybe it was because they just focused too much on building or too much on the TV ministry. But some architects actually say that the real reason that the Crystal Cathedral is having its last service tomorrow, because it's filed for bankruptcy, is because, well, the walls just were too big to let the wind blow. That's what they say. And it happened with the Israelites too. They had this big temple, this big old temple, and beautiful. People were coming from all over the world to see it, and King Hezekiah showed it to the Babylonians that visited. Look at all this gold. Look at all this. Look at this temple. And some archaeologists, Bible scholars, they say that it might have been because the Babylonians were just stronger. It might have been because King Hezekiah told them too much about how wealthy they were. But some actually say the reason why the temple was destroyed in 587 BC was because the walls just got too big for the wind to blow in. But see, here's the problem. How do you grow without getting too big? How do you grow without getting too big? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. How big is too big? How smart is too smart? How pretty is too pretty? How big can this church grow without getting too big? God? I mean, you got to grow, right? Were you going to just stay in a tent forever? You got to grow, but how do you grow without getting too big? Maybe that's the question Nicodemus had when he approached Jesus that night, because Nicodemus was pretty big. He was a ruler of the Jews, a prominent member of the Sanhedrin. He'd gotten pretty big, Nicodemus had. He was a big shot. But something changed. It was just empty inside, and he needed to find out why. And so he went to Jesus. Jesus was getting big. Jesus was getting famous. It didn't seem to bother him. Maybe he has something I don't. Maybe he knows the secret. How do you get big without getting too big? I'll go to him at night so no one sees. So in the middle of the night, Jesus is trying to explain to him about being born again, and Nicodemus, I don't get it. What are you talking about? And you just imagine Jesus is on that Mount of Olives, overlooks Jerusalem, and he's on that mountain, and it's late at night, and maybe the wind was blowing. Just to see, I checked weather.com, Jerusalem, and it was actually blowing 6 miles an hour last night. like midnight when I was writing my sermon really late. The wind's blowing. And you know what else is kind of cool? I checked the Badlands just to see if the wind was blowing in the Badlands where I went camping, and guess how fast the wind was blowing there? It's blowing 6 miles an hour too. So Jerusalem is kind of like this big field. And just imagine Jesus trying to figure out, how am I going to tell Nicodemus, how am I going to explain it to him so he can understand? I can't really tell him, you got too big. You need to stop doing all that stuff, getting big, getting arrogant and big. And he feels the wind blowing, Jesus does. And Nicodemus has this confused look. You know, you teachers know what the confused look. And Jesus is like, and then let's go there. Right? John 3:8. If you have your Bibles. And in John 3:8, Jesus has a eureka moment, and he says to Nicodemus, I got it. The wind blows wherever it wants, Nicodemus. Blows wherever it wants, and you don't know where it's coming from, and you don't know where it's going. That's someone born of the Spirit. That's the secret. The real question as you read this verse, I want to ask you, in this verse, who's in control? Who's in control in this verse? The Spirit, yeah. The wind. It's actually the same word in Greek. The wind is in control. Who's not in control? Who's not in control? We're not in control. You're not in control. The wind is in control and you're not in control. How do you get big without getting too big? Well, who's in control? Who's in control? Jesus is telling Nicodemus, the wind needs to shake your walls, Nicodemus. It needs to shake your walls and make you feel small, and you cannot be in control. You know, after 2 years as a missionary in Southeast Asia, I didn't feel in control of my life. Because in America, you go to the hospital if you have a problem, you crack open a textbook, or there's some expert to explain your problems in life, but in Laos, it's one of the poorest countries in the world, and you know, anything can happen. I just felt completely out of control. I don't know if I'm gonna die. Like, I had a friend whose dad got impaled by some beam that came loose because there's no laws. If I scratch myself outside on a rusty nail, you know, the hospitals, I don't know. I just felt completely out of control there. Completely out of control, completely small and insignificant. But you know, we can't really be that way. You know, that doesn't help us. What, I'm going to go back to not having education, not having good hospitals? We can't do that. And Jesus isn't telling Nicodemus to do that. He's not telling you, oh, you have to be small. Just don't grow the church. Then you won't have to worry about getting too big. Just stay small. God doesn't tell us that. What he tells us is, make sure, as you're building, make sure the wind still shakes and makes you feel small. You know, I lived in New York. After living in one of the poorest places in the world, I lived in one of the richest, just because I'm a nomad. And I lived in New York, and I learned how to be. In Laos, I felt really small. In New York, I felt really big. You know, like in New York, I'm in control. I set my schedule for the day, and I have a plan for my life and my career, and like I have a mission for the day. And if you're in my way, it's like too bad. I'm just gonna like drive past you. That's how I became in New York. It was a little bit funny. Some of you chuckled. That's good. It was a little bit hilarious to come back to California and realize that doesn't work in California. California, you need to look people in the eye and, you know, let people help you. But I still was on a mission. Last week I went to like this Asian market. You know, just like I'm going to go there and just get my groceries and check off my to-do list on my phone and just get back in the car. And I was getting out of my car and I was just making a beeline for my door, and there was this guy with black hair, kind of unkempt, and he was looking at me, and I was like, oh man, I have stuff I need to do. I'm late already. And he said, do you have any food? You know, he was kind of off to the side, you know, he didn't want to get in my space. And I was like, oh, let me check. I went in my car, I found this mango, I don't know what it was doing there. And I got some change and I put it in this plastic bag, and I was like, hey, here you go. There's like a bag of chips, like half open. I didn't think he'd want that. Just, here you go, buddy. Take care. Got in my car, and as I drove past, I saw that he like ran off to the side and he just immediately started eating it, like mango with his hands. It's like, I never knew you could do that. And he was eating it, and I was like, wow, this guy was really hungry. And I looked in my wallet, because, you know, I gave him all my change, but I looked at my wallet and there was like $30 in there, and I was thinking, you know, he probably needs this $30 more than me. Because, you know, I had this budget for the year, and it was like I had this plan for the day, but this guy just kind of blew in and messed it all up. So I stopped and, you know, I said, hey, here's some more money, you know, I'm sorry about that. And he was like, oh, really? Oh, thank you so much. And I was like, you know, I gave him some food, I gave him some money, I can at least pray with him, right? I'm a pastor. So I stopped the car and I come around like, you know, I'm actually a pastor, you know, can I pray with you? You know, just, and he's like, sure, and we pray, and then afterwards he tells me, you know, I'm living in this field here, and my dad died 6 months ago. I'm like 23, I had to drop out of school, I had no place to go, and I was angry at God. You know, I grew up in church in the praise band, but after all this happened, I just got angry at God, and I know it's not right. And he told me the name of the church in San Bernardino he goes to, and I told him, yeah, maybe I'll stop by. I have two choices tomorrow, Crystal Cathedral or San Bernardino. But yeah, that's what happened, and you know, in a way, his name's Ivan. Ivan was kind of like, he's like the wind. Because I had my plan, I had my idea of what I was going to do, and you know, I budgeted out the year. When you plan that far ahead, sometimes, well, planning ahead is good, because before I didn't plan at all. You know, I'm building my career. Planning is great, building is great, but sometimes when we build, God just sends the wind to shake our walls, and Ivan was that wind. He just shook my walls. And this week, I don't know how God's going to shake your walls. It might be like a phone call from the doctor, something serious like that. It could be a big gust of wind. Maybe it's just going to be a little shh, you know, like a little annoyance. Somebody asking you for help when you have stuff to do late at night. I don't know how God's going to send that wind into your life. But church, Garden Grove, we have two options. We can let God shake our walls, or we can just build so big until the wind knocks us down. We can let God shake the walls of our life every day, or we could just grow so big that the wind just knocks us down. In Garden Grove, 117 years ago, you started this church. You pitched this little humble tent. And I could see that in the last 117 years that this church has been here, I can still feel the wind in here. Yeah? I can still feel the wind in this church because, you know, wind moves things around. It changes things, and you're not the same church you were 117 years ago. A lot of churches have come and gone since then, but you're still here. And the reason why you're still here is not just because you've built, but because you've let yourself get shaken. I see as Garden Grove has changed demographically, you've changed demographically too. You know? As its ministry has become more technological and more geared for young people, you've changed too. You've let the wind shake the walls of this church. But be careful. Be careful of guest speakers that flatter you, because you need to keep letting it blow through this church. You need to keep letting that wind blow through this church, Garden Grove. You need to keep letting that wind blow through this church every which way. Not just in this church, but in your life. Because a grove is nothing but a bunch of trees. If this church has gotten big, but not too big for the wind to go through, that must be the same for your house. Your house must not be so big that the wind can't blow through. And your life must not be so big that you don't let the wind blow through. That must be what this church is like for now. Can you feel that wind blowing in your face, Garden Grove? Can you feel that wind? You know, you can hear the sound, but you don't know where it's coming from and you don't know where it's going, but you just go with it. You just let it shake you. And as I ask the praise band to come up for a closing song, I want to give you a little benediction today. Inspectors have checked this church. They've checked the soundness of the walls, and they found that it's a big church. You know, it's got programs. My sermon's going to be online. It's a big church, but the walls, they've tested the walls, and they said the walls still allow some air to go through. It still lets the wind. Can you feel it? Do a little check. Can you feel the wind blowing in this church? I can feel it. Sanctuary, let me give you a little blessing today. May the wind ever shake your walls, Sanctuary. May the wind ever shake your walls, Garden Grove. And as you build bigger, may the wind ever blow harder. As you expand your church, may He expand His kingdom. And as you grow bigger, may you ever feel smaller.